Global spa performance and how does the UK compare? That's one of the topics we've got Amy from Trybe here talking with us today. Hi, Amy. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me back.
You're super welcome. I absolutely love these conversations because it really gets us thinking about the spa industry. And we're going to also talk not only about global, but also about seasonality as well, which will be just perfect timing. So thank you so much for joining me. I'm going to move on to our first slide, which is all about the comparison between the UK, Europe, and US.
Yeah, so interestingly, at first glance, obviously these different regions are offering very similar services, but financially they're performing super differently. So on average, the UK is charging 19% more for 30-minute treatments in comparison to the US. They're charging 59% more less, sorry, than 60-minute treatments in comparison to the US, and they're charging 38% less for 90-minute treatments. And this pricing gap is where the opportunity lies for businesses, from pricing strategies to revenue to the efficiency to guest value. And it's really interesting that the US is leading on price across all durations, but is it because they're charging more, or is it because they're delivering value differently? Are they packaging it as more of an experience as opposed to, oh, we've got this treatment, we've got these wet facilities, and this is what you could get?
That's a really big difference, isn't it? When you look at it, especially at the sort of 60-minute point where it was over 50% difference in your 126 compared to 200.
Yeah.
Most spas are only just starting to look at charging 200 for a 90-minute treatment. And yet there's that massive opportunity there looking at us to maybe look at why the US is able to charge more for their treatments. It'd be really interesting to know why. We'd have to speak to some US spas and understand more about their pricing strategies, but there's clearly a driver there. People are willing to pay for quality, maybe, depending on where they're going, or it's really interesting. I hadn't expected such a big difference, and I hadn't expected Europe to not be almost on par with the UK either.
Yeah, that really surprised me as well. I thought the UK and Europe would kind of have similar pricing strategies, or prices for treatments and offerings that they've got. But I think one thing that I've noticed when in speaking to US clients or at US conferences is that dynamic pricing and yield management is adopted so much more, and that people aren't afraid to use it. Whereas I think in the UK, we're starting to use it, but we're still really hesitant around that. But that could be the huge difference between these revenue drivers and why the US is performing.
That could be a good point because I do see, especially on LinkedIn, more articles of people using dynamic pricing. So I have wondered whether it's more adopted over there because obviously you can charge more for people getting those peak time slots if you use dynamic pricing. And I think there's still that difference between fixed, variable, and dynamic. We in the UK love to say we're doing dynamic pricing, but actually it's variable.
Yeah.
True dynamic pricing is based on demand, a bit like your EasyJet flight. When you book that, that's your dynamic pricing,
Mhm.
not just weekend and weekday pricing that we see here in the UK. So it could be like you're saying, that's driving these higher price per minute essentially over in the US.
Yeah. And I think also US customers just maybe come to expect it, whereas in the UK and Europe, we're still very much like, oh, okay. Oh, maybe I'll have a look and go at a different time. We're a bit more hesitant around it because we're just not used to it as much in the wellness industry.
Yeah, but I would totally do it. If you could select a time slightly differently and save a bit more money and then buy something else, or have a nice lunch or something like that, I'm all over that. Okay, and we're next on to your revenue, your guest spend per spa.
Yeah, so this is kind of looking into the revenue per guest, and it's really interesting just kind of having a look at this. And it's very similar to what we've just seen. So the US is generating more revenue per guest than they are in the UK. And this could be for loads of different reasons, but there on average the spend is £15 more than the European market and £21 more than the UK market. And this just as a overall theme just is a huge multiplier effect on revenue for businesses. And this could be down to a range of different reasons, but it's just really interesting to see actually the revenue per guest is a lot more as well as the guest spend.
So it's not, yeah, so they are actually spending money. But what really hits me here is the fact that Europe was priced per minute less than the UK, but yet it's the spend per guest is actually higher.
Yeah, it's really interesting to look at. And is it because they're maybe upselling differently? They're doing it more on site, they're doing it throughout the booking journey. There are so many different factors that could play into it, but the strategies and the marketing around whatever they're doing is working, and it's definitely looking into, because the revenue per guest is what you want to maximize on for sure.
We have revenue per the differences on the revenue per available treatment hour as well.
Yeah, so this one's super interesting. So we can kind of see how effectively are these treatment rooms being used, and our data kind of shows. So this is treatment room, not therapist utilization, just to clarify. But in the US, there's a huge surge in touchless therapies, and I think that's potentially why we're seeing a huge difference in the UK, Europe, and the US again. So touchless therapies, that could be a red light therapy mask, it could be a hydrotherapy bed, it could be cryotherapy. There are so many different things, but post COVID these treatments have grown by 50% in the US, and this is a huge trending experience for last year and this year, and I think that's a real big driver in why there is this real revenue difference between treatment rooms.
Interesting. Yeah, because it was a revenue per available treatment hour, just for people
Yeah.
who maybe don't appreciate what it is your opening hours essentially, or isn't it, for your treatment rooms? So it's when you can have bookable treatments, and you look at that timing and you divide your revenue down by that timing to work out your revenue per available treatment hour. It's super interesting that you say 50% increase, because I think a lot of people in the UK are looking to repurpose some of their rooms, aren't they? They're looking at what they can do. You see the massage beds popping up in brands like Champneys, where they may have a room and they want to convert it into a touchless wellness space. So perhaps the UK is moving in that direction, but
Yeah.
maybe quite not at the same speed as the US.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that this is based on treatment room availability and the revenue per room. But we were also listening to people talk the other day, and they were talking about how they're taking that wellness experience out of the spa and into other areas of a hotel, whether that's maybe like more of a conference facility, but they're turning it into a wellness space. Are you doing treatments to rooms, whether that's like a therapy mask or using the equipment that they've got, but just really maximizing the revenue potential from it?
I think there's loads of opportunity. And again, although the minutes are lower in Europe, Europe has a better spend.
Yeah, which is really interesting. So they're obviously just doing their strategies and they're doing their pricing a lot more differently. Yeah.
Or the way they yield their rooms, or like you were saying, maybe they've got different services in there. I think Europe is also a step ahead on longevity. So where they have third-party practitioners come in and deliver different services, it might be that the pricing of their spa services might be lower, but actually where they're potentially maybe making the revenue is on those services, those longevity services, like you see at clinics like Shah and Laserhof and things like that, that people are actually more focused on that, where the US is obviously focused on that and the touchless wellness as well. Whereas the UK, I think we're perhaps more of that traditional hands-on spa approach at the moment.
Yeah. And I think that's what people are used to, for sure. But then you all can also maybe talk about, well, this actually is a great opener for people who are new to a spa. They might not want a traditional hands-on massage, and they want something that kind of like eases them into it, which is where the touchless therapies really then come into their own.
Yeah, no, I've got friends who love to go to spa but don't like being touched. It's really interesting. So you're right. There are people who would prefer that to a traditional treatment.
Yeah. And then here, just some different strategies around kind of what is driving this gap. So is it, it's not really about charging more, but it's how is that demand managed? How is the time used, and how are the guests being converted into a higher value booking? Touchless therapies, we've just spoken loads about. They can be booked outside of the traditional spa hours, so to speak. So you could have 5 treatment rooms, they might have different touchless therapies in them, but then you only actually need one staff member on hand to help if they're needed. So just thinking about creative and new ways to kind of maximize on the space after traditional hours or after your busy peak times. Yeah, and then just getting creative with it. So looking at the demand management or looking at seasonality, which we're going to touch more upon. But if the days are getting longer, you could always, open your hours for longer to kind of maximize that. Do you have outdoor pools? Do you have outdoor hot tubs? How can you really maximize on these seasonal trends to help increase your revenue?
Onto this things to ask. So this is really good. I think it's really nice to have this here because it gives you the spa something watching this to go back and have a look at and reflect on.
Yeah, so just some kind of takeaways, I suppose, in that what we've spoken about, how can businesses look at what we've just spoken about and really adapt that and adopt it themselves? So are they underpricing or under optimizing? Where are they losing revenue? And what could an increase in 10% utilization mean for them financially? And then working backwards off that to say, okay, let's do like a mini audit and let's see where we're at and what we can do moving forward over the next couple of months to change this.
Yeah, and I think it's what you said is really important. It's the auditing, isn't it? It's so easy to get trapped in the day-to-day business, but actually taking a moment to step back and think, okay, what is our pricing strategy? Could we change our pricing strategy? Could we move to dynamic pricing if we haven't already? And like you say, what could a small increase in utilization or optimizing your diary with yield management, what would that actually give you in revenue? I used to, at the spa at South Lodge, we used to have a competition on how little white space we could have in the diary. And it's a game of Tetris that if you can get that game of Tetris working for you and you haven't got more therapists on hand, but you can make an extra hour here or an extra hour there, that's a really easy way of boosting your revenue without more therapists, without investing in any equipment, but just better diary management.
Yeah, it's so easy. We all sit and we're all in the weeds and we don't actually reflect on what's happened. So even just thinking we haven't changed our prices for 6 months, is this something we should be doing? Is just such a simple question that will make such a big difference.
Exactly.
Okay, so now we're kind of moving on to seasonal spending. And obviously with summer months coming up, we spoke about this last time, that it would be good to just have a look at data and where are people spending and how are they spending. And so in just real basic terms, we've seen that there are summer and winter, we see peak bookings, but in spring and autumn, we see small dips. And we've kind of looked into, well, why are these happening and at these certain times? So you've got summer, you've got tourism peaks. So people are kind of booking to go on holiday. They're booking these getaways. Winter, the gifting season is upon us. People are looking to buy experiences as opposed to products, or as opposed to here's some cash. They're looking at an experience with that person. Whereas these dips we're kind of seeing are because it's spring. So is it because the weather's kind of changing? So people are enjoying the outdoor time more. They're looking at, we're going to plan to do things later on in the year, so no one's booking. Again, with autumn, you're kind of back to school in September. Everyone has a bit of a mini reset. So looking at how can we as a business then position and retarget to then increase revenue on these dips and again on the peaks around dynamic pricing.
Yeah, you almost want back to school, back to spa.
Yeah.
Or something like that, because it's tricky, isn't it? When you've got these peaks and troughs, how do you drive demand? How do you move the guest to times that you want? And like you just said there, dynamic pricing is a great way of doing it. If you know that you're going to have lots more capacity in the autumn months, and you can leave your pricing lower, and then it can rise at the very end.
Yeah.
But if you in the summer, you can just keep selling at high prices, can't you? If you in winter, if you know that those are going to be booked.
Yeah, for sure. And it's all around just adding value and selling it as an experience, to help make your revenue increases, and just small details that make a huge big difference.
Yeah, totally. Here we go. Oh, fantastic. Here we go. Maximizing revenue during the peaks.
So these are just a few small things that businesses can do if they kind of haven't already thought about it. So during to maximize gift card sales and packages. So upselling is key. We've spoken about upselling before. Events speak about upselling all the time, but through Trybe, our upsell value is £266 per transaction. And so that's just a huge amount that through minimal things that you can do, whether that's personalization or just suggesting, oh, would you like to extend a length of a treatment, can really, really add a huge amount of revenue to that guest for that business. You can also offer seasonal campaigns ahead of time. So like you just spoke about, kind of back to spa, back to school, doing a seasonal campaign is a huge one. But then also around Christmas, you can kind of sell the experience as opposed to here's a voucher. You can say here's a voucher, but then you can add something on and make it more of an experience. Then extending hours and capacity if it's possible. So maybe earlier start times or later close times to help meet demand. If you are incredibly busy, you've booked out all day, by adding on an extra hour, having a look at how you can increase that revenue. Bespoke packages, again, so during the time of year, you can do summer packages, winter packages, time of years, whether that's like Valentine's Day or Christmas, loads of different things. And then looking into your yield management, if you're not quite doing dynamic pricing yet, but having a look at, oh, actually, where it's a weekend, we're only charging £5 more for a massage, when actually you could probably be offering and charging a lot more for what you're doing. So just having another look at the yield management and your dynamic pricing strategies that you've got in place already.
I think it's always tricky because you were saying then about extending the longer hours. It always reminds me of you're busy in the summer, especially in the resort, like the country house hotel sort of scenario, but then everyone wants to go on summer holidays as well. It's a super tricky balance, and you almost want to plan ahead and say, well, you've got that spring time and that autumn time. And not only do you want to look at how you get your guest in at the right time, but actually looking even things like your annual leave. How do you move that and encourage it to be in the off-peak times so that you really can maximize the peak times? That's what just popped to my mind then, is like, it would be great to have more hours, but actually it's all a juggling effect between your guest and your therapist.
It's always the way. You have to try and find a balance. And at iSpa a few weeks ago, there was some really interesting conversations around how people are managing that, because you obviously want to increase your revenue, you want to make the most out of your team, but then equally, how do you balance their work-life balance, make sure they're ready to perform and do the best for your guests? And it was a really interesting conversation around how do you find that balance. Yeah.
Well, if you have the answer, next webinar, Amy.
Yeah. And then these are just some things that businesses could look at to see how they can maximize their revenue when they aren't so busy. So firstly, people are kind of getting back into a routine, but that doesn't mean you can't look at the subscriptions and the membership side of your business. So offering memberships, and you can get perks with those. So you can get credits for massages, maybe saying, oh, if you're a member, you can use those credits during these off-peak seasons, so that you still have people coming through the door, but you're not actually losing out on revenue. You're just making your members happy because it's a bit less busy. They might prefer that. They get more of an exclusive experience. So that's something that you could try. Or adding value to a booking. So again, if you have a treatment, you booked it for 60 minutes, you could just suggest adding on 10, 15 minutes while that person is there, or longer wet facilities, offering afternoon tea instead of a lunch, just small add-ons that make a huge difference. Back to routine promotions, we've spoken about that already, so I'm just going to brush past it. And then exclusive packages. So making sure that what you're offering during these dips can't be booked at any other time, to help entice people in and get them excited about, oh, there's a new product and show, they're going to do treatments around this, there's a new different style of wet facilities or saunas, let's like get people in early to experience that before these peak demands. So just packaging it and marketing it really well and differently to the other seasons that you've got.
I really love your idea on the members, driving your members. If we always forget that if you have a membership, that's your solid revenue coming in every month. But actually, you do need to look at how you're going to retain them. And quite often, you'll have a members discount on treatments and things. But actually, giving members credits is a really good idea. But buy your membership. Your membership comes with 100 credits, or you can use your credits during off-peak times, and you can have those listed, and then people can book in and use those. The member wins because they get a treatment, and then obviously you're able to sell more memberships because it feels like you're giving value. I really like that as a way of using the dips as a benefit in a different way, rather than necessarily making the revenue from the treatment, but actually making it from the membership is really, really positive. I love it.
Thanks, because your members are long term. Ultimately, they're
Yes.
there all year round. So just giving them like a little benefit or something to say, thank you, ultimately, is just such a nice thing.
Yeah. I mean, I am going to laugh and say this comment for all the other spa managers out there. They will obviously push and want it in the peak summer months.
Yeah.
However, it's a good offering if you can maintain it in the off-peak time. And then, so what can we do? Brilliant.
So these are just a couple of strategic takeaways from what we've just discussed. So we know hospitality industry relies on two main drivers, and that's tourism-driven peaks and seasonal demand around the weather and emotional booking for things like gifts and festivities and things. So when you can employ strategies to kind of fill these dips, there's a huge opportunity to be had. So targeting campaigns, bundling things together in packages, offering memberships and subscriptions is one way, and then also just exploiting the peaks. So looking at how can we increase the revenue when we are fully booked, whether that's looking at the pricing power that your treatments are offering, looking at upselling, and then also, are you really maximizing capacity and optimizing it as much as you maybe potentially thought?
And I think that's the really key one there, isn't it? It's without anything else, capacity optimization and pricing power are incredible. I think
Yeah.
you're right. We talk an awful lot at conferences and in general around upselling, and hopefully that we're starting to change that mentality. But the next thing we need to really look at is pricing. I
Yeah.
harp on about it all the time, so I'm really glad you brought it up. Oh, Amy, thank you so much for joining me today. I really hope that this provides some value. I think for me, the global one was really interesting, seeing the differences in the pricing for the treatment time and how Europe was lower than the UK, but then their guest ends up spending more, I think is a really interesting thing to look at. And also for maybe the UK industry to reflect back onto the US and see how they're able to charge more and what's the sort of strategy behind it is really key. But then also looking at ourselves and what we can do seasonality wise, balancing the therapist availability with those peaks and troughs, and even using our members as a way of filling that treatment space up.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting. I think the pricing strategies in the US are so different and there's so much to learn. I think it's just going to take a bit of time to get going over here just because people are slower to adapt. But yeah.
Right, then that means I'm going to go find some American spas and I'm going to start asking them. Amy, thank you. And I look forward to our next one when you're going to surprise us with some more fab data.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.